Well, hello, everybody, and thank you for watching the Positive Talk Hour. We have an awesome show planned today. I'm pretty excited about our guest being on the show. I'm going to show you his book. If you can see that, this is one of many books he has, but this is a new one, A New Psychology of Human Well-Being. He is, I believe it's 5 o'clock where he's at in Italy, and it's noon here in Florida. So we're across the pond, so to speak. So we're going to have a good conversation about this book. This is right up my alley since most of you guys know I am a corporate trainer, and this kind of information would really change corporate structures if they introduce this into their content and in their training. So, hi, Richard. How are you doing today?
Oh, great. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm here in Italy. Actually, it's 6 p.m. rather than 5 p.m., but it's very sunny and very warm, and I can hear the birds singing. You may hear them on my microphone if they get close enough, but everything's marvelous. Thank you.
Well, that's not a problem. I mean, birds are very relaxing. It's kind of like the ocean waves.
Yeah. Right.
So there is a lot of research in this book. I mean, even to the point where I have not gotten through all of it. I mean, what inspired you to write such a profound book? I mean, what got you on that?
Well, if we go back really to the main idea, the main idea was to bring the soul back into psychology. Around 60, 70 years ago, the soul was in psychology. People like Carl Jung talked about the soul, talked about the collective unconscious. Roberto Assagioli, the founder of psychosynthesis, who actually lived not far from where I am in Florence, he totally developed a model which included the soul. And even Maslow, up to a point, reflected the idea of soul consciousness. He didn't call it soul, but he called it a higher force. I can't remember exact words, but anyhow, from that time onwards, as the academic world took over psychology, and the academic world is based on science, and in science there is no God and there is no soul. So the soul just went out of psychology. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to bring it back full and square into psychology. And the byline of that book is called The Influence of Ego-Soul Dynamics on Physical and Mental Health. And the whole idea is that the energetic dynamic that's going on between the ego and the soul actually conditions your physical and mental health.
So basically, they're kind of what we teach in a lot of theories now is that the ego and the soul are almost battling each other or at odds with each other, or separated, I guess would be a better word to say it. And we're bringing them back together into balance.
Yeah, that is one way of putting it. But actually, as I explain in the book, the ego actually is the creation of the soul, and it's the creation of the soul because the soul finds it really difficult to be in what I call three-dimensional material awareness, because there's separation in this dimension of existence, and for the soul, separation is really painful. So the soul learns very early on, before around the age of 2, that it needs to protect itself from the pain of being in this world of separation, and creates the ego as some sort of buffer, and relies on the ego to be able to manage our physical body in our cultural framework of existence. And the problem with the ego is its fears. The positive side of the ego is fantastic and brilliant, and the soul needs that. The soul needs needs us to be able to manage our affairs, manage our health, manage our relationships, manage our self-esteem consciousness without fear. But as soon as you let fear in, it actually blocks the soul from expressing itself in your life.
So it's kind of like the ego is very necessary, and
right.
and a lot of schools of thought, they're trying to almost push out the ego, and that's actually harmful to you as an individual. So
yeah, The thing to remove are the fears of the ego, because the
Mhm.
fear is an energetic vibration which is not compatible with the love vibration of the soul. And so when these two vibrations meet, it causes instability in the human energy field. And that instability leads to mental disorders and also physical disorders.
Wow. Yeah, and then how many fears do we actually have as human beings? You know, we have. I mean, it comes down. I think you actually break down Maslow's, and I forgot what page it's on. You break down Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but then you compare them to, I believe, your 7-stage, your Barrett's levels of consciousness.
Right.
And you know, even getting. I never even thought about self-actualization being broken down into 3 areas, up all the way up into service.
Right. So what I did was I shifted Maslow's model from needs into consciousness and recognized that whatever you value is what you need, or whatever you need is what you value. So I can actually use this model to map people's consciousness by asking them, what are your values? And whatever we value is what we need. And so each value and each need belongs to a particular level of consciousness. So you can actually go online and do a free values assessment and find out which levels of consciousness you're operating from. And later on, I'll give you that. Website, and thousands of people, over nearly 400,000 people, have gone online and done this personal values assessment. So there are 7 levels, and the first 3 levels are all about the growth and development of the ego. Then we get to the individuating stage. That's what Carl Jung called it, when we begin to recognize that all of the beliefs that we learn during the first 24 years of our lives were all about how to fit in to the cultural framework of our existence and how to please our parents, basically. And then we get to the point of being our own masters in a way. We find our own job, etc. So we find freedom. So that's the next stage of development. We find freedom and autonomy, and we begin to say, well, actually, I'm not these beliefs. These values don't align with who I feel I am. And so we began to find out who we are. And that's the bridge to the upper stages of development, the self-actualization stages, which include self-expression. The ego calls that meaning and purpose. Then comes connection, because once you've found your self-expression, your meaning and purpose, you want to make a difference in the world, but you can't make a difference if you can't connect with people. And so after self-expression comes connection. As I said, the soul calls that connection, the ego calls it making a difference. And the third stage then is once you've got to the point of being able to connect with other people and give your gift, your self-expression, then you can make a contribution to the world, to one other person, to your community, or to society. So the 3 things driving the soul are self-expression, connection, and contribution.
That's why if we our self-esteem, I'm just about breaking this down, thinking about it, the self-esteem needs, if they're not there, then we're not going to build relationships, or we're going to be nervous about building relationships. So you're not, you know.
Okay, you almost got it.
Okay.
Me.
Okay. No,
so
correct.
you're all just like one step out.
Okay.
So when the self-esteem level, we what we learn, and that's usually from like 8 to or why don't I just go for the first 3 stages, and that would be easier. So the first stage of development, I call it surviving, and it's from about 3 months of gestation in the womb to about 2 years old, because from the 3 months of gestation, the reptilian mind brain starts operating after 3 months. Before that, this embryo is basically living in soul consciousness. Then the reptilian mind brain becomes the dominant mind brain until the age of 2, and that's the surviving stage of development. And then from age 2 to about 7 or 8, the limbic mind brain, the emotional mind, takes over as the dominant mind brain, and that's all about finding safety in your framework of existence, particularly your parental framework of existence. And then age 7 or 8, the neocortex begins to take over as the dominant mind brain and keeps on growing and developing till we're about 24. So you don't have a fully functioning mind brain until you're in your mid-20s, and this is one of the reasons teenagers do really stupid things, because they don't have a fully functioning neocortex. I'm sure you did some stupid things. I certainly did some stupid things.
Absolutely.
And it's because my brain wasn't fully operational. So these are the first three stages of development. And so the first stage is all about surviving. The second stage is about safety. The third stage, which you just mentioned, the self-esteem stage, is about recognition, about being seen, being acknowledged by people. Now, when you get up to the upper stages of soul development, if you're not able to, if you haven't learned survival needs, then it's difficult to self-actualize, because often self-actualizing means, oh my God, I was in this career and actually what I love to do is this. For me, I was a transportation engineer, and I suddenly realized in my 40s that I was bored with that and that I needed to do transformation engineering. My God, I must have misheard when I was young. I thought it said transportation, but it said transformation. And that often happens to people in their 40s. They suddenly realize that what they're passionate about is something completely different from their career, and it takes courage. And if you have fears about surviving, then it's really difficult to self-actualize. If you have fears about relationships at that second level of development, you will find it difficult to connect when you come into your 50s in order to make a difference. And if you have difficulties at the self-esteem level, you don't feel confident because you were never recognized, then when you get to your 60s and you get to the contribution stage, you will not feel like you're able to contribute. So that's really what you were hinting at when you made your statement, but that's actually the full picture.
Gotcha. So, wow. And that's interesting. You talk about the 40s and that transformation where you were talking about wouldn't they call that, in some people, they would call that like the midlife crisis,
Yeah. Very often it's called the midlife crisis. Now, this framework of needs or values, in my latest book, which is a second edition of the Values Driven Organization, it just came out this week. I use this model to say, well, if you want to create a high-performing organization, you better create an organization that cares for employees' needs. Because when you care for the employees' needs, in the 20-year-old, you care about giving them freedom and autonomy, give them responsibility. And in the 40s, you give them work that gives their life meaning. In the 50s, you enable them to make a difference by connecting with other people. In the 60s, you allow them to make a contribution to the world. Then if you can do that, you'll have a highly committed workforce, and you'll have a very viable and very productive organization. So that's the key to building a really successful organization, in my opinion.
It's interesting you should say that. I've been really studying a lot right now, and you mentioned a little bit in the book about millennials, and talking about the different stages of, I guess they call them, I can't remember, millennials, and then Generation Xers, which is what I am, all that kind of stuff. And I found that if I can get in my room, my training room, somebody in their 60s or even in their late 50s, I could get them to be almost like a mentor in some ways to the younger crowd. They find they have the significant amount of meaning in their life, and they just lighten up. And they almost think the millennials are smarter than them before you do that. And then the millennials feel a sense of connection because they can also help the baby boomer, somebody in their late 50s, 60s, with the computer systems and all that kind of stuff. So there's this contribution going on in the training room.
Absolutely. You nailed it. I was just in Kiev in Ukraine 2 days ago, speaking at the management, doing a master class on the values-driven organization with management consultants. And very interestingly, they had about 8 young people ranging from about 12 to 20 in the room. And I tell you, working with those young people, they got it. I mean, my God, they really got it. And it was a joy. And I developed a really strong friendship with these kids because they got what I was talking about. And so millennial for me is, I think it's the most misused word on the planet at the moment, because a millennial is not somebody necessarily born in a particular time period. I think it's 1982 to something. I can't remember exactly. And people call those millennials. This is not true. A millennial is somebody born in that time period who is brought up by what I would call self-actualized parents. These are parents who did not pressurize the child into being something that they were not. So they allowed that child to self-express. They allowed that child to find ways of making a difference, and they allowed that child to make a contribution. They even showed them the way. And so these kids grew up without too many ego fears and moved really quickly into these higher stages of development. They can't really advance much more than 5 or 6 years amongst in the order that I gave, but they move much more smoothly into the soul stages of development. In fact, just yesterday, I was talking to a young man who was 30 years old in Santa Monica, who had found this book that you're talking about, and one of my previous books called Evolutionary Coaching, where I set out this stage-based model. And he said this had brought him huge clarity because he got all his survival, safety, and security needs met. He was a big wig in some sort of music operation, very successful. And he was getting bored. He said, I'm getting bored, like I was in my mid-40s. Here he is, not even 30, getting bored. And he said, when I read your book, I understand. Actually, he said, I was getting depressed. And I understood what was happening because I'm ready now to move to the next stage of development, to find that meaning and purpose in my life. And so as I talked to him, he told me he was going to take 2 months off and to reflect. And I invited him to come to my workshop in Italy the last week of September, where I actually do a 4-day workshop called Living in Soul Consciousness. It's actually called From Well-Being to Flourishing. And because that's what the workshop is all about. It's about teaching the model, finding out what's blocking you from mastering the stage of psychological development you're at, and thereby able to move forward. Well, I've been rambling a bit. I'm sorry, Jeremy.
No, it's totally fascinating. I mean, I'm just thinking these are things I think about when I'm designing courses for corporations and stuff like that. But it's interesting because you mentioned a few things there that when we're talking about parents that raise us, they could, and they were raised differently. Of course, the teaching model in schools is different for even the current age group, whatever we want to refer to that as. And that would be cultural. Am I correct? I mean, when you think about the culture of organizations are changing, culture of schools are changing, and, just our culture in general. So.
Yeah, in fact, I'm just working on a new book right now, and just up to 5 minutes before I called you, I was actually talking about the different worldviews and how worldviews evolve over time.
Yeah. Well, there's even we were talking about this in a meeting the other day. So you mentioned it as well. Employees. There's a argument that goes on whether your customers are your most important or your employees are the most important. Well, if you don't have happy employees, you don't necessarily have happy customers. And so, it's in the hierarchy that we were looking at. They actually we take an upside down pyramid. We put our line level employees as the number one in the organization.
Right.
The CEO is the last. And so.
Well, and that makes sense because the CEO, it should be, the term used, it's not often used these days, but it was at one point, the servant leader. And what that really means is that a leader who serves the needs of the employees so the employees can grow and develop. Robert Keegan, who formerly from Harvard, has a book which called Deliberately Developmental Organization, which picks up the same idea that if you put your employees number one and you recognize that there are different stages of development, then being a deliberately developmental organization means helping your employees grow and develop, meet their needs at the stage of development they're at, so they will feel a sense of commitment to the organization because they are getting their needs met.
Yeah. So when we're talking about the organization, what you mentioned the 7 levels of organizational consciousness in the book. What are they similar to what we were talking about?
Yeah, The seven levels model applies to every human being, every human group structure. So there are seven levels of personal consciousness, seven levels of organizational consciousness, and seven levels of national consciousness too. And basically, what we've been talking about so far are stages of development. Individuals grow and develop in stages, but they operate at levels. Okay, so I called surviving stage the period 0 to 2 years old. Okay, that's a stage of development. Now, in the consciousness model, somebody can operate at the survival level of consciousness. They don't have to go back to being 1 or 2 years old. It's just that they have lost all their money, they don't have a job, and they go down to surviving consciousness. So there's a consciousness model with 7 levels, and there's a stages of development with 7 levels. And if, normally speaking, the stage you are at will be the same as the level of consciousness that you're operating from, unless something really happens in your life that really threatens you, and then you will drop down to one of the lower levels of consciousness.
That was one of the questions I was going to ask you. And you just answered it. Do life circumstances make you drop to different levels?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Look, I mean, the first 3 levels are surviving, relationship, self-esteem. So, I illustrated what happens if you lose your job, etc. You drop down to surviving level consciousness. And you do what you have to do to survive. And I mean, in the worst case scenario, if you've got a wife and children, and you're operating at that level, and you're living in a developing nation where there's no social security to rely on, you will steal in order to survive. Now, at the relationship level, let's say, you're very happy in your job where you are, Jeremy, in Tampa there, and then, oh my God, you have to go and live in Brazil, and you don't know anybody.
Right.
Guess what? Relationship level consciousness is going to be quite important because you'll need to make friends.
Yeah.
So you'll drop down to the relationship level of consciousness. And so similarly, if you're not getting your recognition needs met in the job that you're at, you'll go and look for a job where you aren't recognized. And we always drop down to these first 3 levels of consciousness if we have problems later, either surviving, feeling safe, or feeling secure through recognition. Secure in the sense of we are a valuable member of our community, and that's where we get our self-esteem from, by being a valuable member of our community. That might be our family, it may be our local community, or it may be the community that we call our work colleagues, our team, or our organization.
So in other words, that you drop down at times to drive you in a direction to, let's say, make new friends or to get a new job, or even in the sense of being in your 40s, maybe to drive a new part of your life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, when I was in my mid-40s, I was at the top of my transportation planning career. I was working at the World Bank. I had a 6-figure salary. If I'd stayed another 10 or 12 years in the World Bank, I would have had a 6-figure tax-free pension. My God. And when I decided to leave the World Bank to do what I call then transformation engineering, but it's actually personal transformation, organizational transformation, etc. When I left, my colleagues said, "You're mad. You're clearly mad. You're clearly mad because you're giving up, another 10 years, you'll have a 6-figure tax-free pension, and you're going to do something. A, you've got no qualifications in. B, you've got no name in that field." And I said to them, "Well, I'm sorry. I have to do this because I've got no choice. This is my soul's impulse. I cannot not do this." And of course, it worked out brilliantly. But, if I'd had fears at the survival level, some fears came up, but, you have to have courage and go through your fears. And I knew in my heart that I was doing the right thing. And so I just did it.
Makes sense. I can relate. I'm in my early 40s.
Okay, what's going on with you, Jeremy? Let's have a little bit of analysis here.
Well, I can tell you there's stuff going on. I'm looking at
well, okay. Tell me, Jeremy, what is it you love to do? What is it you're passionate about?
Oh, subjects like your book.
Yeah,
And
and yet you are doing something which you are maybe not so passionate about now as you used to be.
yeah, I've been doing training for 20 years, which I love teaching. I like teaching human consciousness or
Right. Okay.
team,
So
leadership or team dynamics and stuff like
yeah,
that.
yeah. So training is not what it's about. You want to
Yeah,
step it up a level.
yeah, absolutely.
And that's your challenge right now, Jeremy. And you are not going to be happy until you accept that challenge and do something about it.
You're right. You're right.
You may even get depressed.
That's there.
It's already there. Okay, let's not go any further because we're giving too much away.
You're totally fine. But it's interesting because I always say that the emotions are your GPS and it tell you.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
So,
Yeah, as I say in the book, pain, welcome pain, whether it's mental pain or physical pain, because it's telling you exactly what you need to work on. When you've got physical pain, it's obvious. My knee hurts. Well, you bloody well focus on your knee, because if it's hurting, that's the pain's there. That's where you need to focus. Now, in the mental world, when you're feeling depressed or angry or upset or whatever, that's pain. And that tells you exactly what you need to work on. So I say, welcome pain, pay attention to it, and focus on the issue that is bringing the pain.
yeah. So what was that? Pain. Pay attention inward now. As I think.
Oh, I'd not heard that one. Pay attention inward now. Love it, love it, love it.
I can't claim that one. I think I can't pronounce her name. Ivana Van Zant, I think her name is. The lady that was on Oprah a couple years ago.
Okay, the one I come across most frequently, I say to people, tell me how you're feeling, and they say, fine. And so I say, this happened just 2 days ago in Kiev. I said, fine. I said, okay, feelings inside not expressed. Now tell me how you're feeling.
I'm gonna remember that one. That's a good one. So we've talked quite a bit about a lot of things. So now I want to go back, and I know you kind of answered this already, but I just want to go back to this because I'm thinking about organizations. So if individuals go through these stages, obviously organizations are going through these stages as well. So
yes.
they go into this level and finally hit to a self-actualization service level or whatever. Maybe if they, yeah.
It depends on the leader.
That's true.
Okay, so the culture of an organization is a reflection of the leadership consciousness. I say leadership because it could be the leader or it could be the whole leadership team. So the culture of an organization is a reflection of leadership consciousness. So if you want to transform or change the organization's culture, the leaders have to change, or you have to change the leaders. It's as easy as that. And people don't realize that. So you've got a culture that's not quite working. Okay, so the leader has to change, or you have to change the leaders in order to get the new culture. So when organizations stop performing, very often they bring in a leader from outside, new personality, new culture. Now, when an organization is working really well and successful, they tend to promote somebody from inside, because that person reflects the ongoing culture, and that's the best way to move forward. So yeah, I say this: organizations don't transform, people do, and the people who transform the culture are the leaders.
So if the leader is not self-actualized, then you're not going to have
you can't have an organization operating at the level of consciousness higher than the leader. It's just impossible.
No, it wouldn't be successful.
And let's now bring this back to politics, because this is so interesting. Because when you elect a president, the consciousness of the president reflects the average level of consciousness of the nation. Otherwise, that president wouldn't be voted in. Now, think about that for a moment, because you just got a new president. And in England, we just got a new government. My God, we had election this last week, and it did not go well for the arrogant conservatives. They lost seats. They've got a hung government. They're going to have to form a coalition with another party in order to have a government.
Yeah.
And that level of consciousness is a similar sort of thing. That's what's going on in England is similar to what's going on in
the U.S.
It's similar but different.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting you should say that, because I bring that topic up to a lot of my coworkers and friends, because they want to talk about how angry they are over the current
Right.
president, and I say, well, our consciousness voted that in. That's where the country is at, and that's where energetically where we're at, and that's what came into existence. And they don't exactly want to hear that.
Well, what you say is true, but it is, I would say this slightly different. I would say the majority of the people are at that level of consciousness. There is a slightly less than a majority. They're at another level of consciousness, and so this happened before with the Bush election, and his opponent was
Al Gore.
Al Gore. Al Gore got more votes
Mm-hmm.
than Bush, but because of the electoral system, Bush got in. And that, for me, was a battle of worldviews. Here was Al Gore coming when there's this higher worldview, and here was Bush sticking with his conservative lower worldview. And it's the same phenomenon that just took place again, So here you have Hillary Clinton with a more liberal worldview, and yet still the majority of people in the USA are operating from that more conservative, lower order worldview. And that's mainly because of the education system, and mainly because they don't travel. I mean, when you look at the map of the voting system in America or the USA, the bit in the middle is all Republican, and just on the edges, where you've got cosmopolitan cities, you've got Democrats, because they've been mixing with people with different worldviews and have become more liberal, whereas the people in the middle never travel anywhere and are stuck in their old worldview.
There's a lot to think about there.
Yeah. We have the same thing in England. We have the same thing. The Brexit voters, those who voted to leave, were the people who, if may I say, were operating at a lower worldview because their needs were not being met. They didn't have advanced education. They weren't in good paying jobs, or they were the older people who were more reliant on the stability of the government, if you like, for handouts, and so they didn't want to disturb the equilibrium. So they don't meet many other people from other nationalities, so they voted to leave, whereas the people in the metropolitan cities and the younger people voted to stay, representing a higher order worldview.
Do you think part of that constant duality, so to speak, is the push and tug of, or the pull and tug, or whatever you want to call it, of consciousness growing and evolving? It's kind of like when you
absolutely. But you see, this is interesting. If you go back to 1945, the end of the World War II, the European nations got together thereafter and said, "Look, we never want another world war based in Europe. We need to come together. We need to build economic linkages so that we will never do that again." And so that was the start of the European community, and it became the European Union, and it evolved and grew. Okay, brilliant. Now, what happened in UK, and it's also happened in America, is that after the World War II, there was a lot of equality. People pulled together in order to fight this common enemy, and there was a lot of equality. And post-war, there was this economic boom. And in this economic boom, if you had wealth, the wealth grew at a larger interest rate than if you were purely dependent on income from your job. So, incomes increase like this, so let's say 1 or 2% per year. Don't quote me on the actual numbers, but I'm just giving you an example. Income increased at like 1 or 2% a year, whereas wealth, investment, increased at 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8% per year. Oh. So what that meant was that the wealthy people became richer and richer, and the gap between the rich and the poor increased, and we got more inequality. And that is what has led to Brexit, basically, because people got left behind.
And then you've got people that feel, what is it? My mother used to say that all the time. You always got the have-tos or the haves, and then you have the have-nots, and so that there's this almost animosity
Yep.
between the two. So
Yeah. And it's growing. The thing was, it's been growing in UK and it's been growing in America, in the USA, because although we say we have a democracy in these two countries, the democracy has been hijacked. It's been hijacked by the financial elites in the USA and by the financial elites and the establishment in the United Kingdom. What I mean by the establishment is the class system, the privileged ones who never had to work for money. We have a House of Lords, which is full of privileged people who are part of the establishment or part of the financial wealth of the country. They're not elected. And so both democracies have been hijacked by elites. And so they've been feathering their own nests, because that's what you do. If you're in power and you come from the elites, well, you protect yourself. And that's what's happened. And there was a backlash in the USA on that point, which enabled Trump to get voted in as president. And in the election this week, our conservative majority got cut to the point where the conservatives don't have a majority, so they're going to have to get together and form a coalition with another party in order to rule. So this is a backlash from all of those have-nots.
Yeah. So coming back to, we're talking about this, and I think it relates back to what we were talking about at the beginning about the soul.
Yeah.
So do you think, to me, it would be how to fix this, or how to get back into, or bridge the gap, I guess, so to speak, is for people to get in touch with the soul, but recognize that the ego is necessary, but overcome your fears. So in a sense, love the ego, I guess. And so
sort of. However, it's a little more complicated than that, because the people who are operating at these higher levels of consciousness, who did not vote for Trump, who did not vote for Brexit, have been operating a little unconsciously. They didn't, because they didn't see that half the population was getting left behind. And now this other half of the population is, because we have some form of democracy, have stood up and have started to be counted through their vote. And so the more enlightened side is saying, my God, this is awful, this is terrible, we're going backwards. Well, that's not the attitude. The attitude should be, oh my God, we've lost internal cohesion in our country. And I've been ignoring that. And so it's time for me to look at my fellow citizens and say, yeah, I understand you've been gotten left behind. What can we do to change this so we can all move forward together? So instead of polarizing the situation, those who are operating from a higher world view need to get much more enlightened and say, okay, I don't want to be part of the problem. I want to be part of the solution. I need to help these people, lift them out of poverty.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's what is that the Buddha says, be the change you want, or no, the Gandhi wanted to be the change you want to see in the world. But I think we don't always take the step further.
No.
And say,
no, we're still mostly unenlightened and unconscious, actually. Even some of the more enlightened people are still not quite conscious to the point of view that they recognize that we're all connected. We're all souls having a human experience. That's who we are. We're not. I decided 20 years ago to take all separation out of my life. So I decided not to be a British citizen, but to be a citizen of the planet. Well, I am a British citizen. I'm also an American citizen, but I identify myself as a citizen of the planet. I identify myself as a member of all religions. I identify myself as a male that expresses female energy, and then there are racial differences. So I overcome that by saying I'm a soul having a human experience. And so with these 4 modes of identification, I can actually there's nothing separating me from every other person on the planet. And so I can look at every other person and say, you're an individuated aspect of the universal energy field. I'm an individuated aspect. When I give to you, I'm giving to myself.
Yeah.
When I love you, I'm loving myself. When I love myself, I'm loving you, because we're all individuated aspects of this same universal energy field. And that shifts your whole being.
Yeah, because we're all one in a sense, and consciousness-wise, we're all one. So to love yourself and love others is to love exactly what you're saying. To love yourself, and when you harm another, you're harming yourself, and so on and so on.
Exactly.
So you'd mentioned the profiling, I guess is the way you call it, for finding out what stage people are in. What is that website that people can go to? Is it the
yeah, it's actually it tells you what levels of consciousness you're operating from. So it's www.valuescenter.com. That's VALUESCENTRE, not spelled the English way, not the American way. Valuescenter.com /P as in Peter, V as in vehicle, A as in accountant. So PVA, personal values assessment. Valuescenter.com /PVA. You pick from a list of about 50 or 60 values, your top 10 personal values. 2 minutes later, you get an email back analyzing your values, which levels of consciousness you're operating on, and describing who you are. It's very accurate.
That's awesome. I'm going to have to do it. I thought I did it a while back, but I think I'm going to have to go back and see if I've done it. So I'll have to go back.
Right. Go back and do it again.
Go back and do it again.
Well, I do it every few months just to see where I am, what's changed, etc., etc. But you have to answer honestly. It's we know that sometimes people put in their aspirations, but the thing is to do it as honestly as you possible. What are my top 10 values? Now, as I said before, whatever you value is what you need. And that's a really interesting insight. So, as I said, I was in Kiev in Ukraine 2 days ago. And so I did this exercise with people. And I said, so, write down your top 1 or 2 values. And so then I went around and I said, so what was your value? And one lady said, harmony. I said, that is what you need in your life. That's what's missing from your life. That's what's important to you right now. And then another person said, creativity. And I said, that's what's important to you right now in your life. That's what you need. That's what you value. So it can be what's missing, or it can be what you think is really important. For me, I have top 2 or 3 values, but my really top value is clarity. And I can't operate without it. And that's why it comes through in my books. That's what people say. My God, it's so clear. You write so well. And that's because my top value, it's what I need, is clarity.
That's so funny you should say that. I was just thinking about the other day, the ebb and flow of life, and that the life is like a roller coaster. And the reason why I was thinking that is because I was picking on myself a little bit, because I wrote a book called Peace Be Still in 2012. And then, of course, I've shared with you about 10, 15 minutes ago that, I'm going through this 40s thing that I thought to myself, well, how can you write a book on peace? and then of course I had to get still and realize it's the ebb and flow of life, the roller coaster. I'm going through another stage, and maybe 5-6 years ago when I wrote that book, I was at peace, so now it's time to realize that you can get complacent too, and now you have to
so it's very interesting. What we teach is what we want to learn. What we write about is what we want to learn.
Yeah, and I always think that when I'm teaching or speaking, and I'm like, wow, this is exactly the lesson I'm going through now. So now I'm giving a lecture on it.
Exactly.
So, and I think that's funny. I don't think people realize that when they're watching us speak, in a sense, but it is funny. So, this is so much, there's so much we could talk about, and we only have like another few minutes. I'm just thinking about organizations and culture, but I really think it comes down to exactly what we're talking about, the individual, the person. We've already talked about that as well, that, the people taking the phone calls, the people making the cogs and the wheels, or, the people doing the day-to-day work. If they're in the whole team, in a sense, we call it team dynamics. If that is not running together, what do they call that? Storming and team dynamics. Then you're not going to have a happy organization. But you, like you said, it comes from the leader. That comes from the top down. So how do we reach these leaders that are not necessarily, I guess, conscious, I guess is the way to put it.
Okay, so this is conundrum, because actually you can't, it's very difficult to reach them. So we have my company has a way of measuring culture by mapping values to levels of consciousness. So any team, any individual, any organization, we can ask the employees to pick 10 values about who they are. 10 values represent how the organization operates, and 10 values how they like it to operate. And then we add up all the results, and we can split out the results by location, by level, by age, by gender, by anything. And one of the most important things we measure is called cultural entropy. So basically, when you pick a value, a top 10 value, how you see the organization operate, you can pick a positive value, like trust, openness, friendship. Or you can pick what I call a potentially limiting value, which is blame, information hoarding, bureaucracy, etc. So when we add up the percentage of votes in the current, as people see the current culture for these limiting values, that percentage represents what we call cultural entropy. Now, normally, in a high-performing organization, cultural entropy will be less than 10%. And it's between 10 and 20%, then you need to fix some things. There's always something you can do. But if it gets to 20 to 30, then it's percent entropy, then it's really a leadership issue. And if it gets to 40% or more, it's really significant leadership issue. We also use this tool for mapping nations. And in 2008, in August, we mapped the values of Iceland. Now, Iceland is the most democratic country in the world. Mm-hmm. And so I was really shocked when I saw the level of cultural entropy actually in Iceland was over 50%. And I was truly shocked. And I looked at the results and I could see what was going on. And so I went to Iceland the first week of September 2008, and I said, if Iceland was an organization with this level of cultural entropy, you'd be going bankrupt about now. Mm. And actually, Iceland went bankrupt 2 weeks later.
Wow.
And then I realized that actually, we'd been using this model in organizations for many years, but this was one of the early times we'd used it in a nation. And I began to realize how powerful the model and the tool were for communities and nations. And since that point in time, we've mapped the values of 27 nations now.
Wow. It tells you a lot about who they are as a nation and who we are as a people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I can tell you that we mapped the values of the USA 3 times during the Obama administration. And every time we measured it, we had a cultural entry up at 52, 53, 54%. And it was, I could tell that there was an underlying malcontent throughout the nation. We had a similar sort of result in the UK in 2012. It's like, wow, there's something going on here underneath the surface, which is where people are not getting their needs met. And, it resulted in Donald Trump in the USA. It resulted in Brexit in UK. And so these high levels of cultural entropy, you have to pay attention to them.
Yeah, you can tell that when you get onto any type of social media and just watch how people respond to any small little thing. They're wound up, and there is this angst and anger going on. And of course, you saw it in the election in the United States. You saw what was going on, and you just feel. And there's been time for about probably the last 9 years. I'm like, I really kind of feel I don't know if it's going to happen, but it's almost like we're on the brink of a revolution in the United States at times because of that gap we were talking about earlier.
Right.
But there's definitely an anger going on. So,
Absolutely.
so,
Absolutely.
and my hope is that we're working in the right direction. But I know consciousness is definitely evolving in a sense, or changing.
Well,
So,
the sad thing is we learn through pain.
yeah. Well, yeah, that's true. Pay attention inward now.
That's the sad thing. It's really sad, but it's true. We learn through pain.
Yeah, we do. Well, so one of the things I wanted to make sure that the viewers got as your website, we talked about where you can do the
Yeah.
but then richardbarrett.net, I was just going to tell everybody that to.
Yeah, that's richardbarrett.net, BARRETT, all one word, richardbarrett.net. You can find lots of videos. You can find all my books, all 11 of them. You can find podcasts, interviews like the one we're doing. I mean, there's a whole host of material there which you can download free and get an idea of some of the ideas that I've been putting out into the world for the past 15, 20 years.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. Thank you so much. One thing I would just want to ask is, what is one thing you'd want to leave to the viewers as we're kind of wrapping up the show that we maybe that cover?
Yeah, it comes back to, there's a couple of things. People don't understand the verticality of life. In other words, that we move through stages of development. And once you understand that, it explains so much about what's going on. And it happens in a specific age groups. You can advance a little bit. I've got two books, the book we're talking about, A New Psychology of Human Wellbeing, and a book called Evolutionary Coaching that lays out that. Also in my new book, The Values-Driven Organization, you'll find that model laid out. So understanding the verticality gives you an insight to where you are at this moment in time. And also you can find out what's blocking you from moving forward. What's blocking you will be your fears of not having enough, not being loved enough, or not being enough. Those first three levels of consciousness. And if you want to explore that more deeply, I'm running a 4-day workshop in Tuscany in September, the last week, and you can find that on my website.
Okay, perfect. Richard, thank you so much for coming on, even when you're in Italy, in such a beautiful country, and enjoying yourself. And everybody, thank you for watching the Purpose Talk Hour, and we will have more interviews up, and I'm sure Richard will be coming back on at a later date as well. Thank you so much. Many blessings.
You are welcome. Goodbye.